All right, it's 7 p.m. in Kyiv, and let's start. First of all, I want to thank Committed for inviting me to give this free presentation about Cypress, Introduction to Cypress.io Test Runner. I'm Gleb Bakhmutov. I worked at Cypress for 4 years, and I used Cypress for a year before. This presentation is absolutely free, 1 hour chance for me to show what Cypress is, how it works, explain how it works locally and on CI, explain what exciting things we've been doing with component testing, visual testing, code coverage, and all those things. It's something that if you never use Cypress, this presentation is for you. If you just started with Cypress, this presentation is for you. We will also have in a couple of months a couple of workshops, and I will mention them through this presentation where appropriate. We'll cover in those workshops how to use Cypress on a little bit of a higher level, right? We will actually do exercises together. Those workshops will be over 2 days each. The second workshop in September, I believe, will cover running Cypress on continuous integration service. In this presentation, I will kind of mention continuous integration, but I will not go into details. The workshop actually gives you a chance to look at how Cypress works on CI and try it yourself and see if you're successful. All right. So I'm going to cover lots of things. There'll be demos, there'll be slides. I'll explain where to find answers in our documentation. I'll explain what the difference is between the Cypress, the test runner, the open source test runner, and the dashboard. And the most important thing, I will answer any of your questions. So if something is confusing or you want to know the details or you want to know my opinion of something, post a question either on Zoom, there's a Q&A widget, or if it's like something simple in a chat, I'll keep an eye on the chat and Q&As on my second screen. So if you post a question, I will see it and I will try to answer it either right away or at the end of this presentation. The whole presentation is scheduled for 1 hour, so we'll see how it goes. All right. If you want to know about my projects, you can find me online. On Twitter, you can ask me questions. You can see everything I've done and all open source projects that I have on GitHub link from my website, gleb.dev. Regarding Cypress, so this presentation, and I'll share the link in the chat right now, is available. It's public, and you can browse the slides with me right away. But it's not the only presentation about Cypress introduction that I've done. I've done a few, and I tagged a few recent introductions to Cypress that are not out of date with Cypress introduction tag. If you browse my slides.com/Bakhmutov, you'll actually find a lot of presentation about Cypress. So if this presentation is too simple, just look at the other Cypress presentations. You'll find something that goes into details. On my personal blog, glebbakhmutov.com/blog, you will actually find more than 100 blog posts about Cypress and how to use it in particular situations and so on. So if you want your answers for advanced Cypress topics, usually I cover it on the blog. Okay, so the Cypress as a company, I joined it 4 years ago. It was 5 people, now it's 50. We personally believe but we're working on the best way for testing anything that runs in a browser, any site, any web application. And we are a very distributed team. I'm in Boston, the company is based in Atlanta, but we have people pretty much everywhere around the world right now. We don't charge for Cypress. Everything that I'm showing you Cypress related today is absolutely free, MIT license, no limitations. Shiva, if you want, just go through my slides and you will see all the links there, okay? We make money out of Cypress dashboard that makes sense for organizations, and I'll mention what features that provides and compare it a little bit with a test runner. Okay, so why are we here? Well, if COVID taught us anything, is that if your company doesn't have a web application or website that's working, your company probably hasn't survived, right? If you sell something or a service, right, you provide a service and users could not use it during COVID through a website without like calling you up or visiting your physical store, then I don't think you're doing very well. You know, our users expect our websites to work. They need it to work. We know the quality software behaves the way the users expect it to behave. And the only way that we know to ensure that this is actually working the way you expect it is to write some tests. The tests can be different. Usually people describe tests as a pyramid. At the bottom of this testing pyramid, you have unit tests. You know, you're testing the smallest pieces of your code. Could be a function, could be a class, right? And, you know, the unit tests, okay, they're useful, but they can all pass separately, and then the software together makes no sense. If you want to actually put things together, when you like look at individual components where like several pieces of code work together, well, those are already called integration tests, right? And that's where you discover that what you wrote and the other team has written doesn't work together. Like it makes no sense. And the users actually will see it, right? There are lots of things that, you know, kind of look in isolation correct, but put together, when you integrate them together, they don't work. The final thing that you really want to test is end-to-end, where you test your whole website as if you visited as a user. You want to test your API. You want to deploy the server and then hit it just like a front end would, right? And those are at the top of the pyramid. That's where you discover not only your logical errors in your code, but also all the errors in your assumptions about the data, how users gonna use your site, how DNS is set up, how your database is configured, how you connect to your email system or your, I don't know, like backend system, right? So I believe that end-to-end tests are extremely important to the users, right? Because if end-to-end tests don't pass, what is the chance for the case when the human user comes in and tries to use your website, right? So if end-to-end tests work, the chances are high that when a human user goes to your website, it's going to work. So I kind of like to invert the pyramid and say, hey, end-to-end tests are probably very important. As a developer, I still write a lot of unit tests, right? Those are fast, you can quickly run them, you can access all the edge cases, but the users don't care about those things, right? They care about the whole system working together. So for a web application, if you think about end-to-end testing, what you have to do, you have to open a real browser. You cannot use JavaScript emulation of browser because it's not a real thing. A real browser is a very complex piece of machinery with 30 years of dust and dirt kind of and protocols and supporting, you know, for all various things that internet can throw it. You want to open an actual application, meaning like visiting a URL, not loading a piece of code and then kind of poking it. No, you want to visit the URL just like a real user. You want to interact with the page like a real user. So that means a couple of things, and we implemented them in Cypress. A user can do one thing at a time. The user cannot type and also type something else, right? One thing has to finish completely, then a second thing has to, like, all actions have to happen sequentially. If a user needs to click on a button and the button is off screen, the user first scrolls so that the button is visible. The user makes sure the button is not occluded by something, not covered by a model. The button should be visible, should not be disabled, only then the user will actually click the button. So the same is true in Cypress. We try to check all the things that would prevent a real human from using the site. And then you need a large library of assertions to make sure that everything you assume is working is really working. Okay, so enough of justification. Let's see how Cypress solves the problem of end-to-end testing. You install Cypress using npm install, just like you install any JavaScript npm module. You can use yarn, you can do npm, and you just install. And when you run this command, it downloads Electron-based binary that we built for every platform. We cache that binary so you don't have to download multiple times. But we build this binary for Windows, for Mac, for Linux. And this is completely MIT licensed open source project that you can inspect yourself by going to our repository. And I would suggest when you just do that and you just start this process, you also read our introduction to Cypress guide. So like kind of keep it open so you understand what to do, what's happening, and you don't get stuck. So I want to show you a quick demo of how I write tests using Cypress, how I debug failing tests using Cypress, and then we'll talk about the rest, right? We'll see how to set that up on CI and all the things. So I have my example here. It's completely open source project. You can look at this. But here's what you will see when we open it, right? You will see the test in our code editor, and you will see the actual Cypress running. So let's do this. Okay, I'm gonna switch. So here's my code editor. You can use any code editor. I already started the application. So let's see if we can see the app right here. So I believe it's at localhost 888. Okay, not surprisingly, it's a to-do app. Right? It's something simple, but everyone kind of have seen one probably and understands how it works. I can write new item. I can mark items completed. I can see completed or all active items, and I can click completed. Nice. Okay. So let's test this application. I will open Cypress. So there is Cypress open command. So when you do npm install Cypress, it creates this shortcut that you can open using npx or yarn or like node modules bin. Okay, so right now I don't have any tests. Right, I deleted the folder that was there. So let's write a test. So my application lives right in the same folder. I do strongly believe that keeping tests and application in one repository helps you because you keep the tests and the features in sync. Okay, so everything that Cypress has by default is in Cypress folder. So I have Cypress folder, and inside I have integration folder. That's where I'll write my tests. Okay, so let's say it adds to this. Let me increase the font a little bit. Let's see. You don't see my VS Code, Hannah? Okay, let me stop sharing and then share again. Maybe that's the problem. 1 second. So I'm gonna share desktop 1. Okay. How about now? Do you see VS Code? Okay, perfect. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, so we're gonna write this test, right? And it uses Mocha syntax, so every test is it. And you describe a feature. It adds to this. That's the name or title of a test, and then we give a callback with all our commands. Everything in Cypress is chain of this global object called site. So the first thing I have to do, if I'm a user, I have to go to that site. So I'll say site visit HTTP, and my site is running locally. It could be any URL. So, okay. Now I have to open. By the way, before we proceed, Cypress comes with built-in Electron, which is like a version of Chrome. And on my machine, I have all these browsers already installed. So Cypress looked around, found them, so I can use any of these browsers, which are Chrome, Firefox, Edge browsers, right? I like keeping Electron just because then I don't have to switch between Chrome versions. Okay, so if I click on the spec, here's what you see. It opens a browser window. On the right, you see the application, right? Actual localhost 888. And this is Iframe, and this is a real browser. So I can open my dev tools, I can inspect everything, and I can, for example, find this element. Okay. So let me just bump it up a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so it works. I can visit the site and I can see the elements. So now the user would have to probably find this element and type something like new to do, right? Okay, so let's say first we have to find element. You can find element by selector, by CSS name, by data attribute. So I know my element has a class new to do. And once I found it, I'll say, write code and then followed by enter, which is special character. And we use kind of fluent syntax. If you keep working with element, just keep chaining it, right? So write test and I'll say enter. Okay. Now notice I just saved it in my code editor and Cypress already reran the test. So Cypress is watching. Let's see, is watching my code. So every time I, for example, save my file, it automatically reruns the test. So I usually have Cypress open on one side of my screen or one screen and my code editor, and I just keep writing tests and it keeps rerunning them to make sure they're still passing. Okay, so in this case, this is what I've done. I visited the page, I found the element, and I typed 2 items. So let's see what we have here. So our site shows the right thing. On the left, we see this what we call command log, right? It's the name of a spec file I'm running, the name of the title of the test, and then we see every command that we executed. So it shows everything here, but it shows it with details as it executes. So we have visit, get, type, type. And here's something cool. If I click on a particular command, notice it says printed output to the DevTools, right? I can open my DevTools, switch to the console, and every time I click on a command, it actually shows all extra details about what happened. Like what did it find, right? And these are all actual elements, right? Because this is real browser DevTools. Okay, so this is interesting. But here's something else that kind of is unique. Notice as I hover above every command, the iframe changes. So Cypress has direct access to the iframe under test. And when it notices during the command that something inside the command iframe changed, it knows this command did this. So for example, when I typed write test, it noticed that this is how it started before the command. And this is what the DOM of my iframe looked like after the command has finished. So it stores those snapshots of the DOM and styles. And then I can debug this by using my time traveling debugger. And I can see that, yeah, write test followed by enter really adds an item here. Okay. So this is a time traveling debugger that shows what every command has achieved. Now, we just wrote something using just actions, right? Visit the page, get new to do, type new to do. I mean, type and type again. We haven't really checked if application actually did anything, right? For that, we need an assertion. So what's a good assertion here? Well, after we type 2 items, there should be 2 items here. Okay, so I'll say get me, and I think it's like to-do list li. Okay, let me see. So I'm going to save it, let it rerun. Okay, and notice get, and this is my select. So I remember that selected correctly because it actually shows that it found 2 matched elements, and it actually highlights the 2 to-do items that I was looking for. So that's the command, it finds items. So now I need to add an assertion. So I say should have length 2. Okay, so now we have commands in our test and an assertion passed. Perfect. Now, before I go into like debugging thing, I want to show you something else. We work very hard to make sure that when you start with Cypress, you're successful right away. Every command, has those built-in assertions and tries to behave like a real user. So for example, visit would fail if my server is not responding. Okay, So for example, if I try to visit like something that's completely incorrect, the test will fail because, well, the server refused to respond. Things like get. If there are no elements, then it won't be able to type. If an element is disabled, it won't be able to type, right? And in order for you to write useful tests, you just need a couple of commands like visit, get, contains, type, click, and so on. But how do you know how to use every command? Right now, this is completely JavaScript project. Right now, you might be confused. How does a command do its thing? Give it wrong arguments. So for you to actually get benefits from Cypress, all you have to do in a modern code editor is to say reference types Cypress. Okay, so WebStorm, VS Code, even I believe Atom and Sublime probably nowadays understands this. And it understands to go into node modules where you install Cypress locally and grab the TypeScript definition for Cypress. And once you add this line, even a normal JavaScript project that doesn't have anything to do with TypeScript, now all of a sudden will get IntelliSense. So if I hover over site, all of a sudden you will see our documentation, our JavaScript docs that we ship with Cypress. So you don't have to install anything else. So for example, how does site visit work? Well, it explains the arguments, gives a couple of examples. How does get work? Bunch of examples. Now, VS Code actually broke this URL, but you can actually go to this URL and see all the details. Okay, even assertions like should have length, right, have examples. We really work hard to document everything that's available. Great. Now, so I have this test. This is how I work locally in interactive mode. I keep working on my application. I keep writing tests. It watches the test, reruns it. I'm happy. What do I do when I work on CI, for example, or if I don't want to work interactively and I just want to run the test? So I'm going to close Cypress for now. Okay, let me just make sure it opens. Okay, so I'm going to exit Cypress. So right now, I stopped writing Cypress. So what would you do on continuous integration service is not run Cypress open. How you would execute npx Cypress run. So I hope the Zoom didn't slow down my machine. Recently, my machine has been struggling running things. But Cypress run, this is the second command. This is what you would run on CI. In this case, as you see, it is running the same Iframe browser, and you can change the browser, but it runs them in a headless mode. So it doesn't pop up. It's not watching the spec files. It just executes everything it runs. It finds in a spec file. Okay. Yeah, my laptop is struggling to run both Zoom and Cypress, so just bear with me. Okay, finished. So right now there is nothing, wrong with this test. It's fine. But imagine I broke the test, right? For example, on purpose, for some reason, I expect 5 items, even though there are 2 really. So here's what would happen on your CI server or when you run locally, but in a headless mode, not with Cypress open, but with Cypress run. Okay, we're still running the same spec. Great. But remember, this spec will fail, right? Because there will be only 2 items, and for some reason I said there should be 5. By the way, so notice that we never assumed anything about the framework that's running on the page. We never had to, kind of go into the internals of a library. It doesn't matter. Cypress interacts with your page only through the standard APIs like your DOM, the network, cookies, local storage, events. It doesn't care how you render these things. Okay, so my test obviously failed, right? That's why everything is in red. It says, timeout retrying, not enough elements found 2 and expected 5. Okay, that's true. there will be only 2 list items and not 5 like Assertion said. So this is kind of what test runners would give you if you run them on CI. You would have some text that says assertion failed. But if we want to debug this, notice that it also says there is a screenshot. So for every spec file and every test, if a test fails, by default, will be a local image saved automatically. So I can look at Cypress Screenshots and I can open this file. All right. So this is what happens. By default, when a test fails, it takes a screenshot of a test runner where you see the app and you see all the commands and the fail command. So now you can understand why it failed and where it failed. You can kind of see, okay, these commands passed and then there were 2 items found because I see 2, I see them here, but why did I say 5? So it's already useful. You should store those screenshots automatically as test artifacts so you can debug a failing test. But also notice that it saved the video. Okay. By default, every time you do npm install on every platform, we install everything necessary to write a video. And so we can look at what the video shows us. Again, it's a single video per spec file. Okay. So loading the URL. And again, my machine is struggling. That's why it's kind of jerky. So I hope it actually works out. Come on. Okay. So here's what it shows. It showed that it added 2 to-do items, and then it actually timed out trying to find 5 items, only found 2. So you store those test videos as test artifacts on UCI, and when a test fails, you play the video to understand what went wrong. An even better strategy is to pull the video from previously passing tests run and look at the correct video and the video that's failing and just see where things diverge. So this is how you would use Cypress on your CI. Let me go back to Cypress interactive mode to explain how Cypress fights flake. Because you notice that the test didn't fail right away, right? It actually was spinning for a couple seconds. So check this out. Oh, by the way, so we know that we're visiting the same local host over and over again, right? So I'm going to actually move it from here into Cypress JSON file, and I say base URL that we want to access is this. And actually, if you're testing like staging, you can override the base URL from command line or through an environment variable. Okay, so now we're not hard coding the local host 888 in every test. Okay, so we're visiting the URL. Okay, see this spinner right here? It says that it timed out retrying after 4 seconds. So every test runner that's available except for Cypress works outside the browser. It literally sends a message for, let's say, WebDriver protocol, a Chrome Debugger protocol, and says, find me all these items, and then maybe click on them or run an assertion. Cypress Test run right inside the browser, and it has direct access to the iframe or the application. So what happens, Cypress knows that, hey, find me all items with this selector. Maybe application hasn't refreshed yet. So Cypress can actually check the number, and then it's not 5 as expected, and it goes back and tries to find the items again, and then checks assertion again, and then again and again. And if after 4 seconds by default it times out, then it will fail the test, because everything on the web happens asynchronously. The same logic applies when we, for example, try to type. If element is disabled, Cypress will try to wait up to 4 seconds for element to become enabled, and once it becomes enabled, then it types. So it doesn't have to like send the messages blindly, find element, click on it, and if in between something happened to that element, then the test fails and it's flake. No, Cypress can directly observe the DOM changes, run its test commands and assertions while the application is paused because it runs in the same event loop, and then retry as long as necessary. So these things can be set to be short, long, globally per command. So in this case, for example, it keeps retrying and retrying and retrying. So if we add one more item, now it found 3 items. And then we say 4, and then we say 5, and boom, the test passed successfully because, well, now there are 5 items. We don't know how your application is implemented. So by default, we allow you to actually, time to process, to maybe go back to the server, come back, update the DOM, and so on. Okay, so let's remove this and fix the assertion. Okay. Now, this was a typical test. Now in To-Do MVC, there are a lot of tests that we can write. We can exercise all the main features, starting from the very important and then going all the way to the edge cases. We want to exercise editing to-dos and marking them completed and then the routing. So the real tests would look like this. So let me just rename this folder and bring back the folder I had before. All right, so you get a sense of how the application is being tested. Well, first of all, you can visit the application before each test. So you don't have to hard code the common actions, where hooks that you can run before the test, after the test. We kind of can do the same thing where we add a bunch of items and then we validate, and then we can validate the text in each item. We can write tests, for example, for marking to do as complete. We can create custom commands, so to extend Cypress with your own logic. Then we can, find element and find element inside, then check if it has the right class or doesn't have the right class. So let's make sure that we can run, or let's see how those tests run. Because Cypress has an advantage. Because it operates in the same event loop, it can actually, achieve high speed because it never has to wait more than necessary, right? There's no need to hard code waits because it can quickly understand, okay, element is there, I can type, okay? Okay, my laptop again is slower than usual, but this is how it actually works. And it's cool to be watching this, right, as you sit there, or it's cool to watch the video of a test run from CI. But this is Cypress in operation. So really quickly, so we're testing code or a site that runs in the browser. If you have code that runs in the browser or runs in both Node and the browser, you can unit test it inside Cypress. If you have components, you can write component tests. The only thing Cypress cannot do really is test code that's meant to run in Node. Cypress can run code via site task and other things. It can run code in Node to access your file system, your database, but Cypress is not built for testing code that's supposed to run in Node, like your server, for example, or your file manipulation. It's just not built for it. Okay, so the test finished. And again, the time travel in Debugger, I can see how this, for example, created 3 to-dos, then selected the middle one, found the toggle button, checked it, and you can see how toggling that button completes the to-do. And then I can click clear completed, and then the test clicked that button. And then if we go to clear completed, it should no longer exist in a DOM. Kind of like interesting test. Okay, so we can exhaustively test all situations in our application using Cypress. So Of a real quick update, you can do Cypress open when you write test. You can do Cypress run. That's what you probably will do on CI by default. You can also run Cypress using module API, in that case, not from command line, but from other node scripts. And for one thing that I have is that all the spec files run in a browser. There is also a plugin file where, for example, if I want to connect to the database, initialize it, I would write this code here. So you see how to do it in our documentation. Okay, so let's move on. So this was the demo. Okay. So Mocha, Cypress comes with everything bundled in. So Mocha test engine, object, all the commands, all the assertions, Synon for stubbing and spying on method calls. It's already there. Probably first couple months, you wouldn't have to install anything else. But there is a huge library of additional plugins for Cypress that can extend it with our functionality. So as I said, the architecture of Cypress is very different from WebDriver, Selenium, Test Cafe, Puppeteer, and so on. Your application is iframed, but it runs in the same window as the test, so the tests have direct access to everything inside your application. And when Cypress opens the browser, Cypress sets itself as a proxy, so if your application is making network requests, Cypress can spy on them or stop them. There is a diagram, kind of explains the same thing. Our philosophy is you should be testing your own application. And if you have third-party services, you can spy on them or stop them. We have a whole guide explaining what to do about network requests and how to approach them. The most powerful thing that I can show, like in this introduction, is this test. So imagine I have application every 30 seconds. It actually makes a AJAX request using fetch and fetches new fruit from the backend and then shows it in the browser. And during the test, you don't want to go to the server because it will just give you a random thing, or the server might not be there. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you don't want to wait 30 seconds. Cypress has an ability to control the clock inside that iframe where your application is running using cyclock. So right now, cyclock throws the clock. Then we can define all different network intercepts. We can spy, but in this case, I'm intercepting, and I'm saying the first time and just one time when the application is making a request to favorite fruits, just return apples. And the second time application is going to make a request, just one time return grapes, and after that, always return kiwi. Okay, so we visit the page and application is making a request, we're intercepting the request and returning apples, and we're checking if the apples is displayed on the page. Okay, so this was at the load, and then application make another fetch request 30 seconds later. So we just tick the clock 30 seconds and we check that the grapes is now returned or displayed because our intercept returned grapes. And after that, we can tick a couple of times and it always displays kiwi because from now on, our network intercept always says kiwi. And of course, because we're stopping the clock, it runs super quickly. So here's I'm using time traveler debugger. The whole test takes 260 milliseconds to finish because it's synthetic clock for application. And then everything else works correctly. And you can see the intercepts are all reflected in the command log, and you can inspect them and see in DevTools console everything that happened. Okay, you might ask yourself, well, how do I learn about Cypress? How do I find out what it can do? We put a lot of effort in our documentation that's at docs Cypress.io. All of engineers update the documentation and API and so on. So I want to show you an example of, let's say we use, let's say visit command. All right, so I would go to documentation for command visit. Every command that we have in the Cypress, right on the left, is documented the same way. We explain its syntax, how to use it correctly, all the arguments, what happens after it, and we give a lot of examples, kind of explaining the situation and then explaining it in detail and then explaining the rules and so on. Every command is documented so you can understand how it goes. And also, every time there is a command, we also suggest a couple of relevant commands that are related. So go, for example, would go in a browser history, back or forward. Reload means I'm visiting the site and then I just want to reload it like a user would reload a page. Okay, so we do suggest you start with a couple of useful commands. This will be already useful, and learn from there by reading our documentation. We also have a lot of examples. We have a great YouTube channel that covers using Cypress and how our companies through our webinars use Cypress. And on a personal note, I have my own YouTube channel where I just have a playlist of Cypress tips and tricks that show Cypress in action, because sometimes it's nice to read things, but sometimes it's better to see them in action because it probably explains more. Lots of example application. You can search GitHub by topic, Cypress example. And there are free and paid courses related to Cypress, and we collect the links to them, so you can start with them. We also have what we call canonical big application, which is just TypeScript, modern, and we fully tested using Cypress. So this shows the best practices like how to connect to the database, how to initialize the database, and so on, how to log in. And I have my personal links for everything Cypress related from cypress.tips at Cypress. Okay. Everything related to using Cypress and writing tests. Well, this coming workshop in July, 3 hours every day, I believe, and we're gonna just do exercises, using a real application. We're gonna exercise writing tests, controlling the network, and so on. So make sure to sign up to that workshop. I covered the Cypress Open and Cypress Run commands. These are the only two commands you really have to know. Pretty much we have examples for every CI provider. We also build Docker images. So if you don't have a CI provider example from our Cypress guide for CI, then let me know and I will add it. I have to say that we even had a chance to write adapters for Cypress for a couple of popular CIs. So for example, if you deploy to Netlify, I wrote Netlify plugin Cypress that makes it really simple to install Cypress, cache Cypress correctly, and run Cypress tests. If you use Circle CI, we've written Circle CI where the whole workflow is just one line of code, well, 2 lines of code. My personal favorite right now is GitHub Actions. Just a single line to run Cypress correctly with caching and all parameters set. So you don't have to mess with config files and be frustrated. Again, second workshop that we're gonna do, we committed to, is in September. Over 2 days, we're gonna spend a couple hours like hands-on writing commands one by one for running Cypress on continuous integration service, and then doing Circle CI, GitHub Actions, and maybe Netlify as well, using those helpful utilities that we've written. Okay, everything that I've shown in the first 43 minutes is open source, completely free. It allows you to do your testing by yourself without uploading any test artifacts anywhere, completely private, on-prem, wherever you want, on your CI provider, and have full power of Cypress Test. Once you kind of have a lot of tests, it becomes easier for you to track them in a central location. And that's how we actually make money as a company. And that's what allows us to have 5 people working on Cypress itself and 4 people working on Cypress component testing, and I believe 5 people working on DX, on developer experience. So what we do as a paid feature makes sense for businesses, like recording test artifacts in one place, so you don't have to find the videos, right? GitHub integration and so on. So something like this, you have project running locally, you set up project to record, and then after every run, you'll get your screenshots and videos and test results all in one place. So you don't have to look at CI. If you have hundreds of tests and many spec files, well, running them one by one takes time because end-to-end tests load the whole site. So Cypress is only as fast as your application, right? That's no way around it. So if you have a lot of specs, it makes sense not to run on a single machine, but split specs across several CI machines that you spin up, right? It's not Cypress, it's you spin up more CI containers, and Cypress allows you to say parallel, and that's it. They all spin up in parallel, and instead of executing all the tests on one machine, they all intelligently are scheduled based on previous test timings, which cuts it down to whatever number of machines you set it up. We even have like a calculator that tells you, how long will it take to run it on one machine, two, and so on. So literally, it's very simple to achieve. If you have n machines, 1 over n, or n speed up of n. I mean, have Cypress, give you GitHub integration or GitLab integration, Jira, Bitbucket, where Cypress after test run comments on as a status check and as a comment and tells you like, yeah, everything was great, or here's what failed. Click on a link, you'll see the video and the screenshot right away. If you're a business, you want to know, are you writing better tests? Are they failing more often? What's happening? So this is our test analytics and history, and we can show you all that. But most interesting one is this, right? What happens if a test sometimes fails and sometimes doesn't fail, right? What is known as flaky test. So I said that Cypress has a built-in retry mechanism, which is great, right? It works, right, per command level. But sometimes the internet could just have a hiccup, right? And if you run the test again, which is what I would do, right, immediately, the test passes. So these tests that are very hard to fix are called flaky tests. With no code changes, if you just rerun them, they pass or fail. So we have a detection for that built into Cypress, and the dashboard can actually show you those flaky tests. And you can you're not ignoring them, right? You, over time, put efforts to actually tighten them down and make it better. Okay, so our dashboard will show you which tests are flaky. And the way you figure it out, but you don't fail the whole build, is by enabling test retries. You can enable them globally, you can enable them per test or per suite. So in this case, retries in open mode 0. So when I do npx Cypress open, if a test fails, it fails. When I do Cypress run, notice that I'm setting it to 2, right? So if a test fails, it will automatically try it 2 more times, and if it succeeds, then the test is successful, but it will be reflected on the Cypress dashboard. So you keep track of that. You're not losing that information, but you're not stopping the whole build for nothing for a test that you retry, and it will succeed. So this is how it looks in the GUI. So this test, for example, retried. First time it failed, so it retried up to 2 times. It failed both times, so the test failed. Now you can stop the build and figure out what's wrong. But if it succeeded on attempt 2 or 3, then we call it a flaky test. We keep track of it on a dashboard, but we consider that a successful test run. Okay, so everything I've shown so far visited a URL, right? But you're not visiting the URL when you're working on a particular component, for example, right? You want to write a date picker in Angular or write a date picker in Vue or React. So when you work with those components, you want to be able to use the full browser and the full power of Cypress so you can see it, because just DOM and just is not the same thing, right? And the debugging experience in Cypress with full DevTools, with Angular or Vue or React DevTools is absolutely incredible. Okay, so we released component testing. This might be slightly older syntax because I've done it 2 years ago, and we've only finally incorporated into the product. But basically, for each framework, you can import a mount command, and then you have your hello component, and you just use this mount, and you directly just mount that component. You can pass props and so on, right? After you mount that component, after that you use the rest of Cypress commands. That's it. It's a standard running mini web application with the component becomes the web app. And so all standard Cypress commands, including network control and contains and get and type, all that jazz, now is working. So there is no difference after that. So it's pretty cool that you can take your knowledge of end-to-end and apply to component. And still, you don't have to know how the component is re-rendering itself under the hood, because everything is asynchronous and you only interact with it through the use of a DOM and standard browser APIs. So this test looks like this, where I'm mounting this hello, and the time traveling debugger works, and it just behaves as a mini web application. Okay, the code coverage. So there is a question about code coverage. We have a guide for code coverage that actually includes links to example repositories, and we have a bunch of them. And we have including Angular applications with TypeScript and let's say Jest plus Cypress Test, and then we combine the code coverage. So the code coverage is extremely important because when you're writing tests, you want to know that you are not testing the same thing and yet you've forgotten something else. So by instrumenting your application, which in many cases is as simple as this, right? If you have create React app, we have a module where you just preload it before you start the application, and it instruments your app on the fly. So by doing this and including our code coverage plugin in a Cypress in a spec file, you get these reports automatically, right? And you can upload those numbers and those JSON files to third-party code coverage services. So again, just look at our guide, and it explains how to instrument your app, gives you examples, gives you instructions on how to include the code coverage plugin with your Cypress test, so that at the end of a run, you get this HTML and all the JSON files with code coverage, like line by line, function by function, branch by branch. Okay, something that's really nice to have is visual testing. So Cypress doesn't have visual testing built in, but you can use any third-party or do-it-yourself visual testing services. So this works like this. Inside your test, you have a couple of commands. Usually, for example, this comes from Percy, but there is Applet tools, there is Hapo, there are do-it-yourself services. So in this case, it will take two snapshots, one at the start of a test, another one when we added toppings to the pizza. And then imagine someone goes and modifies, CSS file or SVG file, or changes the library so the layout will change. Usually functional tests don't catch that, because functional tests check number of items. Is the text the same? Am I at the right URL? They won't catch the color change. But the visual testing, notice Cypress test passed, but then Percy says, hey, there are visual testing. So look at those. And if we open that page, it will show in red the changed pixels. So that difference in SVG changed the color of the pizza crust from, kind of yellow to green. So now you can say, no, like we're not releasing this change. This looks awful. So if you want to know more about visual testing and the current state of things with lots of examples, I've done this presentation literally yesterday. So look at the slides. You will see what we're doing about visual testing and how to do it yourself, or why you might want to use third-party service. Okay, again, I'm like a parrot. I keep repeating this, but this is very important. Cypress Test runs in the same browser as the application. It has a boundary, but it can directly access everything, which means if you have some kind of data object or application object in your app, you can expose it so that the Cypress test, end-to-end test, can actually reach inside your application and do something. So in this case, my application code says if I'm inside Cypress, right? If window.cypress is defined, that means I'm running inside a Cypress test browser, right? Or a browser controlled by Cypress. I will take my to-do model that keeps all my to-do things, and I'll just set it on a window object. And if you set it on a window, then Cypress can reach. And so Cypress can say then in a test code, hey, go into the window, which goes into application window iframe, get its property model, which is what the application said, run an assertion against it. And then, for example, you can say it has a method add to do, so you add a to do. Now, this is interesting because this completely bypasses the UI. So you're not creating to-dos by finding the input box, typing, pressing enter, typing more. Instead, you directly reach into application code, so call a method. This will create a to-do. Should you always use it? No. You want to test adding to-dos through the GUI. But I had a bunch of tests that I've shown before that didn't need to go through the GUI again and again. For example, tests that want to check like clear completed or routing don't have to test adding to-dos again because that was already tested in those tests. So by reaching into the application, you can quickly do anything you want. You want to log in a user or create a user, boom, just call a method. You don't have to go through the GUI. So this will give you superpowers. Okay, I'm partial. I love Cypress before I start working there. But many developers, if you ask them, will tell you that they actually write tests and they love writing tests because of the GUI, the experience, the documentation. Kurt, who is excellent at WS, he's having fun. Right? He's writing his code, but he also pretty much writes tests as well, just because it's so much fun to write those tests and experience test writing and debugging. I have to say that to me, if you give me an hour, right, and you say test this application and write tests, I would start by writing a few functional tests that go through the most important user workflow. Okay, and I would use visual testing. The test confirms that the whole page looks the same. Because after that, I can refactor, I can add new features, and as long as those tests pass and the app looks the same, I know those user flows are not broken accidentally. If I have more time, then I would look at code coverage and I will say, hey, I need to test this particular input for date picker, or this particular logic. I would write more component unit API tests. Okay, I think that's the most efficient thing. So before I answer any questions from you folks, I just want to kind of quickly say we have a roadmap that's public. We should be updating it more often, but it's there. So some of the things we are working on are recording tests from the GUI. So when Cypress runs, you'll be able to click around and it will record and create and write back to the spec files those commands. You can already try it. It's already available. So Cypress Studio, a recorder is available. Try it out. Give us any feedback. Kind of logging in through UI and the session API is something that we have as a key limitation. So for example, if you want to go to your app and then you have to log in and go to, I don't know, Microsoft Live, which kicks you back, we'll lose you because Cypress can only control one domain at a time. So we work on that. So session API will allow you to save your session, go to another domain, do something there, then come back and so on. So this is session API allows you to do multi-domain. Okay. Iframe support is tricky. You can do it, but it's not the easiest thing you can do. I mean, it's kind of similar to Shadow DOM, but we added. So better iframe support will definitely is on our roadmap. And right now, Cypress works on any Chrome-based browser. We're also looking to add support for Webkit, which is what Safari is based upon. Many users said, Webkit support would be enough for them to trust Cypress to test the site as if it were tested on Safari. Again, desktop version. Okay, thank you very much. You can find the slides online. I'm Bakhmutov. Cypress has its own Twitter, cypress_.io. And remember, I just kind of breeze through everything or many features that I find exciting about Cypress. If you want to try it hands-on and ask me and make sure you cover the basics, and when you come back to your company and you become like the champion and the expert, we have a couple of workshops that we spread over 2 days, so it's not overwhelming. I'm gonna make sure that at the end of those workshops you come out and you know as much as I know about those topics. Okay, I see a couple of questions in the chat, so let me quickly answer those. And to answer those, I'll do the following because it's kind of hard to see. Will Cypress, wait, can I, 1 second? Okay. Will Cypress logs support preview of application inside an iframe? Okay, so what this means that if I'm, let me just run one test and then I'll stop it. Okay, so right now, notice when I hover over command in a command log, it restores the iframe application. If you had an iframe here from another domain, or even from the same domain, I believe, we don't restore that because usually we don't see inside that iframe. So we never actually grab its content and we never restore it. Will we support it? It would be nice. I agree. Right now, it's not high on priority list. So I apologize. It would not be anytime soon, I'm afraid. Any deadlines for upcoming features? So let me show you the roadmap. Okay. So if you go to the roadmap, okay, these are the big issues. So notice that Cypress Studio is something that so it's already out there as experimental feature, and notice the issue number is super low number, right? That means it was open a long time ago, so we never got to it. For everything else, like if we have issues, we usually, if we start work, we'll have a PR, okay? If it's not linked here, then you have to look at the issue and see if there is a PR that's linked, right? So deadlines. If there is no PR, that means there is no work done right now, okay? Even if there is a PR, we don't know if it's easy or not to finish it, like to push it over like the finish line. For example, the network stubbing, right? And like what we right now can stub any request. It took us a couple of years just because I started, failed. When someone else started, failed. Then he finally finished it and pushed it all the way and still solving some of the issues. So that's why we don't give deadlines. I mean, it's open source project. If you really want to, contribute, like we welcome. And we have features that were compared completely from outside. So it's hard to predict when things are going to happen. Okay, are workshops suggested for Cypress newbies as well? Yes, especially Cypress basic tips and tricks. Right, workshop is absolutely absolutely suggested. Okay, so the first one. So this workshop is really interesting because the contents of this is open source, right? Both workshops, the contents are repositories where we have application and we have, as you can see, the beginner section is absolutely like, this is like what you would practice if you were learning it from scratch. Every chapter in the workshop has its own contents of slides and its own folder with tests that you would write. In that particular workshop, I think we'll cover beginner and some of the intermediate stuff, but we won't have time to do this. But I would be happy to answer any of the questions. And the cool thing is that if you cover just the beginning stuff, you would then read the rest and you would actually understand what I'm talking about in these sections, and you probably will be successful in learning about those topics, right? And if you use Cypress, if you're not a beginner, I guarantee that during the workshop, you'll actually fill the gaps in the knowledge that you knew you had, and you would fill the gaps that you didn't know you had, okay? So everyone will find something useful in those workshops. Does Cypress support mobile testing? No, so you can set, your test in a viewport, you can intercept requests and maybe modify user agent header, but understand this still runs on a desktop browser. So even with emulation, it's not the same as like, Safari on an iPhone. So it's not the true mobile testing, just mobile resolution. So there is a question, let's see. How can I run one test scenario if I have several scenarios in that feature? So this is a Cucumber Gherkin syntax where instead of writing JavaScript, right, you write a feature file and has this BDD syntax. Okay. Because we use Mocha engine under the hood, and normally I would say only, and it would only run that test. So for example, if I'm here and I say for this test, right? Okay, so then it runs only that test. I don't know how Cucumber syntax does that. There might be some syntax where inside a feature file you can say given that only. I'm sorry, I don't use that syntax at all. I also, yes, I recently published a plugin called Cypress Grep. So this is a runtime thing where you can, run just the test by its title or tags. So for example, I have a couple of tests tagged smoke, like 2 tests in this file. So I can run them, just those tests, from command line, or I believe right now I can even go to the DevTools and I can say Cypress Grep, and I don't want to specify title, but I'll say smoke. Okay. No. Okay. Yeah. Okay. It was actually correct. The very first test is actually tagged smoke as well. That's why I was confused. Okay. Notice that it only ran this test and that test, right? Because they were tagged smoke and it skipped the rest. And the cool thing in those smoke, I think the same should work for your feature file as well, but I'm not sure. And now it's the cool thing in this plugin, you can do what I call, or other people call, burning a test, where you can say, run those tests, but don't execute just them once, but execute them n times, right, in a row, just to make sure there is no flag that really the test is solid, which is one strategy our company suggested when they add new tests to their spec files. They first execute 100 times, make sure the test is stable, right? Okay, is it possible to, let me put this question here. Nope. It's weird that it doesn't copy it right away. Okay, is it possible to force Cypress to control the network debit? For example, okay. So, in a real browser, right, which is Chrome, let's say, I can simulate the network, right, by using, let's say, device emulation, and I can, kind of set the network speed, and I can even simulate, I believe here, yeah, right? So here's the thing. I always say that Cypress has direct access because we just load JavaScript in one iframe and it has direct access to the iframe on the test. Yes, but in order for us to actually launch the browser and, for example, control some of things like cookies, those commands are privileged and you cannot just do them by just executing JavaScript. We control cookies, for example, by using Chrome Debugger protocol. This is the same protocol that DevTools uses, right, to control the browser. And if DevTools can do controlling the network, that means it's done through Chrome Debugger protocol. Cypress can do it as well, because we already have a connection. So the way we would do it, unfortunately, it's not documented, and I've been meaning to document for like a year now. So basically, there is a hidden command called Cypress automation. I forgot if it's like automation, and like it would be something like network enable. So this enables network control, and then like network like speed, and then it probably would be something like 2G or something. Okay, so this is possible. It's just we have to document it. And another thing that you learned today is that we have competition, right? Which is fair. All other tools. Where is Puppeteer? Puppeteer is a testing tool where your tests sit outside, and when it sends commands to the browser using Chrome Debugger protocol. So guess what? We have Chrome Debugger protocol connection open to this browser like right now. So everything Puppeteer can do, we can do it. We just haven't exposed the API for that yet. So know something that you're not like wasting your time just learning Cypress and Snapple. Okay, is Cypress useful for unit testing? Yes, except for testing code that only runs under Node. So if you're trying to test, let's say something like this, const fs require fs, and then you like, well, this is not gonna work because you cannot load fs module in a browser, right? But if you writing like expect window A to B, right, like hello, right, to equal, absolutely fair game. You can write those unit tests yourself, and let's say the best thing that I suggest, right, if you have questions about Cypress, is to search unit test. So we have recipes. I forgot where I've written types of tests or test types. I documented this recently, like something maybe in like core concept, introduction to Cypress. Oh, like that. I think that was it. Test types, right? We can explain component testing. This doesn't have unit tests, but just believe me, yeah, you can. Okay, any suggestions for mitigating the risk of Safari in cross-browser? Okay, honest opinion. If it were to me, we would like not even support Firefox or anything but Chrome. I mean, the number of bugs we found between, let's say, Chrome and Firefox in the last couple of years is like, 2. Like really, if you write modern software using modern libraries, it kind of be like there is no like outrageous bugs. Completely agree that Safari is kind of falling behind. So my suggestion for mitigating the risk, when you develop your software locally, use Safari as a developer. all the time. So you see something, and run all your Cypress tests in Chrome and Firefox, right? You will find the problems. Okay, what's your suggestion for rendering a component using Jest or Cypress? Absolutely Cypress, because Jest will give you Jest DOM, which is a browser emulation written in JavaScript, which is completely different thing. Its behavior is different from a real thing. It doesn't do lots of checks like a real browser would do. And my opinion about this is in this presentation. And in this presentation, you kind of can see like my thinking about component testing as like 2 years ago. And I'm happy that component testing right now is a feature inside Cypress. Okay, and I think I answered everything, right? I don't see any questions in the chat. So the only other suggestion I would say, wait, is if you have questions, we have both Discord. So let me, first we have a channel for, okay, for everyone. Okay, this is my opinion about unit testing. Okay, and we also have a more modern chat channel for everyone that we started using recently. So you can join the Discord server right here. Okay. So if you have more questions, I'm usually spending time in the chat, and other people from Cypress team usually spend time in the Discord. So we'll be happy to answer any questions. If you have something else, feel free to reach out either through Twitter or from my personal site or through email, and I'll be very, very happy to talk about testing and answer any of your questions. All right. I think big thank you to everyone who attended this presentation. Thank you for listening to me and learning about Cypress. I hope to see you at one of our workshops. Yeah, copy the links because they'll be gone once the Zoom session is over. Okay, I'm out. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.